I hope you're interested in the session. Then also please take a seat. If you want to continue the conversation and miss also our panel, then please do it outside. So also the people in the back would be great. Probably I'm not talking loud enough. Hello. So welcome to this afternoon session. I hope also you had a good break. This session is really in the heart also of the discussion also from the entire event. It's on climate finance, institutions, and delivery models. So my name is Holger Dahlkmann. I'm your moderator for today. I'm a consultant based in Berlin, but also I have the pleasure to be a senior advisor of the High Volume Transport Program, and I will talk about that in a minute a little bit more. So welcome also to all panelists. I will introduce each of you also in a minute. But before I want to also briefly also raise as an introductory remark some of the work which the World Resources Institute is doing in partnership with SLOCAT, and that's also funded by the High Volume Transport Program funded also by the UK government's Foreign Common Development Office. So the HVT program is a 5-year research program which supports research into sustainable transport, particularly with a focus on Africa and South Asia. And one of the projects also finance is currently the access to climate finance. And we have seen also yesterday some of the information is about the project and the initial results at the Climate Finance Roundtable, a fantastic event. Congratulations also to World Bank and to WI and World Business Council for Sustainable Development, which already also started also to discuss also this big challenge. The so-called ACF is creating a digital tool, so on also how to access this climate finance. And this session today will be also use also this information also to build in. If you want to learn more about that, also there's Ben Welly also from WI just in the front, which I see. So ask him more about also the project. But one of the things also the project already also highlighted, we have currently about 1.3 trillion US dollar investment annually, but most of that goes into the high-income countries. And at the same time, and we heard that also yesterday, it's predicted a gap between also 0.8 trillion for Africa annually till 2040, as well as also 1.6 trillion also for Asia. So we're talking about very large amounts. And I hope also we will find already also some solutions also with the panelists there also how to also closing also that gap. So today also we want to also ask ourselves how to scale, but then also what is also the role particularly also for private investment, and how we also overcome also some of the barriers. So I'm very pleased also that I have a very great also panel here, and what I'd like to do is I will introduce each of you very brief, and then I'd like to ask you also to briefly also describe also what is your organization is actually doing, but also your idea and your contribution on how you also scale also the future in investment. Afterwards also we will have a conversation, and I talked already to the panelists, so please also interrupt each other in a polite way, interact, and I'd like also to open also the floor for the last 10 minutes. So also for the audience, please also make note also of your questions, and then we also go also hopefully also to that. It's a lot, so we get better started, and starting with with Jeanette Boudoir, and I already apologize for not for my French. So she's partner and head of the ESG and sustainability at Meridian. She joined in 2016, and you're looking particular on also the ESG and governance policies and procedures. And but you also have worked on projects around the globe in Africa, Caribbean, Central and South America as before. So welcome, and looking forward to hear more from Meridian.
Thank you for having me today, and for this great event, which is extremely important, of course. So maybe just to give you a bit of information on Meridiam. Meridiam is a private investment fund specializing in infrastructure assets in Europe, North America, and in Africa. And we specialize in three main sectors, one of which is sustainable mobility, social infrastructure, and energy transition assets as well. Now, when we talk about mobility and what we have in terms of assets in Africa, it includes, of course, BRTs and mobility, but also we have airports, ports, roads, and rail assets, because we focus on these assets and infrastructures that will provide an essential service to the community, to the country, to the region, and we develop these assets, most of the time from scratch. So that means that we have become a real project developer, and we will include all the necessary and undertake all the necessary studies, design work to develop projects that will address the real needs of the communities of the country, and that will provide the service on a long-term basis, because we invest for more than 20, 25, sometimes 40 years. So long-term investor in infrastructure assets that are essential, resilient, and sustainable. And the reason why I think that I was maybe invited on this particular panel is also why, are we talking about ESG when we're talking about financing? Well, ESG is all about resilience and sustainability, and it's important when you're talking about mobilizing finance for such assets as transportation, because we need to think about these things, because transportation is always part of a of a system. It's interlinked with so many different networks, and if you don't think about how to integrate your particular project in a much wider network of different infrastructure and facilities, your asset itself might not be resilient and sustainable in the end. And of course, because we invest for very long periods of time, we're all about resilience, all about making sure that we don't have stranded assets. And I think that we will be talking about the different features a project should have in order to attract private investment. But I think that this is kind of the issues that we have to think of.
Thank you. And it's great also that you're already raising also the issue of resilience. Was yesterday a great presentation also by the World Bank highlighting currently also the investment also from a resilience perspective is far under less percent, 10%. So like the need also not looking also from a decarbonization and sustainability perspective, but also from a resilience perspective. So going also to my left also to Chris Aydun. He's a co-founder and partner at Persistent, and He has over 40 years of experience in venture capital, private equity, finance. So you started really early in the kindergarten, I assume.
That's true.
So welcome. So tell us a little bit more about Persistent and your work.
Thank you, Holger. So Persistent is a 12-year-old climate venture capital firm. We call ourselves both a venture capitalist and a venture builder because our model is to go in very early in companies, sometimes at launch, and co-launch the company. We will put our own people into companies as CFOs, CTOs, as necessary to help companies build themselves. And our model is to try to build companies that are going to move sectors in climate. And so we go in, we try to help them prove out their business models. We help build the business models often. We help them prove out their business models, figure out how to execute and bring those companies to scale. We started back in, well, actually it was 2011, but it took us a year to get formed in the energy space. We made our first investment in electric mobility actually in 2019, but that company failed, so I'm not going to talk about that one.
Well, that's probably the most interesting then.
Yeah, they were the first failure in the EV sector in Africa. It was an electric motor boat company on Lake Victoria. So that's basically our model. We were pioneers in the EV sector, in the 2- and 3-wheel EV sector in Africa, and have launched or came in as early investors in 4 companies in that sector in Kenya, Tanzania, Ghana, and the DRC. 3 of the 4 have local founders and management teams, and the first one was made in 2021. As a firm, as I said, we've been in business for 12 years. We have 22 companies in our portfolio. We've never actually had a formal fund, but we are now in the process of raising a $100 million climate venture builder fund, which we hope to have a first closing on this year. Correction, we will have a first closing on this year. Thank you.
So if you have still some dollars to spare, so you know where to invest. So moving us to Jamie Lesser. He's the director of the Asian Development Bank, and is also in the space also for some time, particularly with his sustainable transport initiative, providing support to ADB's transport operation across Asia and Pacific. So, Jamie, tell us a little bit more about also like the current workers of the ADB and also where you're heading.
Thank you, Holger. On the finance side, ADB has made a commitment for $100 billion of climate finance from our resources cumulatively out to 2030, so over a 10-year period. Happy to say that we're on track. There was obviously a dip during COVID, but we're slightly behind because of that. But I think we will meet that $100 billion of climate finance of our financial support by 2030. As a transport event, perhaps even the better news is that around 50% of that last year is 48% of the sector's commitment came from transport. So we're a large part on the mitigation side, and there's an NDB methodology for different modes of transport: rail, public transport, road transport. So in terms of the mitigation side, well in advance of many of the other sectors, including the energy sector. Transport within ADB is the largest. On the adaptation side, it's good we were talking resilience. We're also slightly behind agriculture in terms of our financial climate finance on the resilience side, and the very unfortunate floods in Pakistan a few years ago just demonstrates how rapidly a transport network can disappear from a climate-related event. There has been huge investments. There's still an infrastructure gap, but there's been huge investments in infrastructure over the last 2-3 decades. It's reaching that critical point about maintenance. do we have to try and look to ensure we build up, maintain those assets, build those assets in terms of that climate resilience, better drainage, rainfall modeling, and bring in even road safety? I know that we're talking about the broader sustainability of transport, but if we can manage those systems to ensure there is a critical transport link and build it up for future weather conditions or natural disasters on the resilience side. So that's internally this $100 billion target, and we are calling ourselves the Climate Bank for Asia and the Pacific. So that's there. How we crowd in, because that's only it may sound like a large number, but it's a very small number in the bigger scheme of things. So how do we try and crowd in those other requirements? Very quickly, I'll just say that a lot of it, particularly in the decarbonisation, will come from private finance. And within our organisation, a lot of that money has come from our private sector arm. What we can do on the sovereign side and working with our client governments is making sure we set quite clear decarbonisation pathways that would de-risk any of those investments from startup companies looking to do that, but also individuals making those choices or fleet managers deciding which type of vehicle they should be looking in. So that sovereign support to de-risk the future private investments of e-mobility and the other components as well. Thank you.
Thanks. So that's actually a wonderful segue also to Vikram. Vikram Kumar. He's Global Transport Manager at the International Finance Corporation, IFC, here in DC. And I read also you have a great track record also with IFC also under your leadership also went also from 472 million in 2020 to 1.44 billion in 23. So, but also you worked before in all over in Asia, so as a country manager so for Thailand and Myanmar. So tell us a little bit more about also the IFC, and as Jamie also highlighted, the importance of the private sector. So how do you work with the private sector?
So thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, and a tough act to follow with James promising 100 billion. I think we're much more modest. You know, we'll if we can get a few billion out of the door every year, we'll be very thrilled. I think for us, transportation is a business that has historically sort of struggled. A lot of the sectors we operate in are, you know, very admittedly high, difficult to abate sectors, right? So let's call a spade, right? When we take transport projects, road projects, aviation projects to the board, we get hit by a board saying, why are you supporting roads? Why are you supporting airports? You should be doing only rail. You should be doing only green shipping, right? And that's, if we take that kind of an approach, I don't think we'll make a meaningful transition, energy transition, a meaningful decarbonization strategy work. So the way we are looking at solving for this challenge is to look holistically at the problem we're solving for, look at clients end to end, right? If you speak to a client in the road sector, a client in the logistics space, a client in the aviation space, what would it take for them to really significantly become, Paris aligned, reduce their carbon footprint? What is their decarbonization pathway, right? Helping them develop that plan and then implement that plan. I think it's easy for us to come in and say, we are happy to finance you to do investments in XYZ. But how do they go about doing it? How do we build capacity in these institutions? And which has to be the private sector. It has to be the Meridian of the world. And other big developers saying it is important for us to make this transition, but we would appreciate the support of an institution like IFC that can come up with donor resources, blended finance, put all of it together, package it into a solution that then they can implement, which is what they're good at doing. So I think for us is the main idea is to be a partner for the private sector to implement real change on the decarbonization side. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, last but not least, we have Emma Stevenson. Emma is a business manager and the Sustainable Mobility Lead at the Shell Foundation, and she's working there since 2016. And you work across, in fact, mobility, energy, and enabling enterprises, focusing particularly on new technology evaluation in a variety of business development, and particularly on the incubation side. So tell us a little bit more about your work.
Thank you. And thanks again for the opportunity for being here to discuss this as well. So essentially, Shell Foundation were set up over 20 years ago as a UK registered independent charity, set up with an endowment from Shell, which is where the logo comes. So we're independent but linked. In terms of our work, so we have a focus on serving those that are underserved in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, by supporting them to access productive use energy assets to increase their income. So we're looking at predominantly the low income segment. Over the last 20 years, we have supported a number of social enterprises, entrepreneurs, intermediaries like Persistent, doing a great job. And through that time, we've leveraged about just over 9 billion in climate finance, impacting 274 million lives. And we've got a breakdown on the website for how that's panned out. There's a lot of lessons within those numbers, and I hope to share some of that today. On the opportunity side, with our strategy, we're 15 months into a revised strategy, which aims to impact 60 million people by 2032. And within that strategy, we've focused on specific customer segments. So we've got agricultural focus on smallholder farmers, small businesses, and also on urban transporters, which are essentially 2 to 3 wheel vehicle drivers looking to earn an income productively and in a commercial application. We've seen, if we take a driver in Kigali, for example, that they can shift from an internal combustion engine vehicle across to an electric vehicle and lift their income by 40%. So at an individual customer level, at a unit level, the transition to cleaner mobility makes sense. And we see huge opportunity to collaborate. So essentially, Shell Foundation's focus is on the customer perspective. So not solutions first, but a problem statement first. What is the problem that we're solving for? And often that is accessibility, so access to the vehicles that they need at an affordable price. And in particular, seeking to understand solutions for women and what that looks like. So an interesting stat from 2021, 600 billion in climate finance, 2% of that deployed with a gender lens. And so there's an opportunity there to think through how are the solutions being developed with everyone's needs in mind. In terms of our agility, we try to be agile in the partnerships that we work on with organizations like DFC and BII, FCDO and others. And we try to ensure that we've got a focus on scale in terms of the scale of impact that we seek to have. Thanks.
Thank you. We heard yesterday or so as part of the WI presentation, but also in general so on the discussion at the World Bank Roundtable, so that we have different barriers. So we have so the question of regulations, the lack of aggregation, as well as then also the lack of finance. So Chris, would you agree also on that? But also, give us some positive examples. What are the lessons learned from your work, particularly in Africa?
First, I do want to point out, as Emma pointed out, I neglected to mention that the reason I'm here is because of Shell Foundation, that Shell was an early supporter of ours and then ultimately an investor. But let me talk about financing in the startup sector. And I'm talking about early stage companies, private companies, not municipal bus companies and things like that, because obviously that's a whole different kind of financing. But what we're looking at in the e-mobility sector is what you see across many sectors that develop, and that is you have nascent companies, you have people going out and trying to do different things, try using different technologies, trying to raise capital, so on and so forth. And the objective is to prove out a business model. and proving out a business model and then showing you have the ability to execute that business model is what will attract more capital. The order in which you attract capital is grants, friends and family, venture capital, later stage venture capital. And then when you get big enough, when you've got recurring revenue, then you borrow or you find some other off balance sheet kind of financing mechanism, leasing mechanism, things that are debt-like. And what we've seen in the off-grid energy sector, for example, in the mini grid sector and solar home systems, is we've seen that the investment community, the MDBs, DFIs, donors want to support the sector, but they are not comfortable with equity risk. And we've basically spent 10 years in a sector that started to have equity players in the beginning. I'm talking about off-grid energy, faltered, and really has then a lot of debt investors, and companies had no choice but to take on debt. They even reached a point where the debt investors said, well, we won't lend you any more money because you don't have enough equity. So and that's what has really sort of caused the world of off-grid energy to shrink. Because there's no equity investors. So when we look at, for example, the 2- and 3-wheel market in Africa, which has a number of young players, is working out its business models, trying to see if what looks good on paper actually works, they need equity support. And one of the reasons we come in so early and we come in and help them build, we help them build so they go faster, so they can prove out their models faster, and we bring in equity to help them. But there needs to be equity, grants, donor capital, subsidies, things like that to get that sector started. It may eventually happen. I think it's destined to happen no matter what. As Emma says, the economics are inevitable. Just a question of how long it's going to take. Do you want it to happen in 5 years or 15?
So Vikram, so bringing you into the discussion, we heard also from Chris on the need also for equity finance. So you work also with companies also to help them mobilize. So what is your approach? What are your good examples?
I think it's a real challenge, Chris, to be very honest, and I fully agree with you, right? For small entrepreneurs in dislocated markets to go out and raise equity, it's not easy. I think investors, VC investors are looking not just for return, but also exits, right? I think that's one of the things that at the back of the mind, you're thinking about, if I get in now, even if the business does well, can I actually find a reasonable exit in my time frame? I think from our perspective, we used to do a lot of small ticket equities. I think we've sort of moved out of that space, not because we don't want to do it. We still believe it needs to be done. I think our experience has shown that we don't have the capacity to manage these investments on our own. We need fund managers like yourself who have the bandwidth, the expertise, and the know-how to deal with local entrepreneurs. And develop an institution that are expensive at that scale. It doesn't work. So I think what we've now pivoted towards is actually working through fund managers, both on the VC side and on the private equity side, to take this kind of risk, to provide this kind of support, because that's the only way we can play that role. The other interesting pivot that we've done recently is to start looking at mezz capital very, very aggressively. And a lot of the situations we're facing is entrepreneurs have really diluted a lot, raised a reasonable amount of equity, don't have any much more room to dilute. We are coming and they have borrowed, right? So you have the stress of debt repayment coming in on the cash flow side, which is hurting your ability to invest and grow the business. So I think where we are looking at it differently now, I think, can we actually come in with patient mezz capital, which sort of comes in to refi a part of the debt, but goes out longer term to allow the business room to grow. And I think we are seeing a lot of appetite from businesses that are transitioning from the large VC side to early private equity, having a lot of appetite for that product. So I think that's a nuance to how we've started looking at this business different, and particularly in e-mobility, we think that's the way we want to go. Equity or mezz. Debt, I still believe it's early. I think we can do the big e-buses that Jessica in my team is leading. I think that's something that we would definitely support. But the bespoke models, small dislocated businesses, I think there we have to take this approach. Thanks. I do want to say one more thing. Really happy to see more gender diversity on this panel than the last one. So thank you.
Emma, talking, I should also say, also like without Shell Foundation, probably also this event would actually not exist, because they were also the founders of the former Sustainable Mobility Programmers Embark, so giving us a credit also to Shell Foundation also from another side. So we heard you're working also in the space of incubation of really also of startup. What is your experience? And probably also give us I tried twice to get an example. So give us an example on a success.
Yeah, happy to do that. And maybe should clarify as well that we see our role as essentially taking risk where others won't. So we try to come in with a risk tolerant approach. And that has enabled us to work with other partners like DFC in creative ways. So creating results-based financing mechanisms, for example, for earlier stage companies. With our partnership with DFC, we did hone in on the e-mobility space. So one partner in Rwanda, one partner in India. And the results-based financing mechanism there is that the loan is structured that based on outcomes of performance on impact for gender and for other social benefits, the interest rate of the loan can be stepped down based on that performance. So it's linking impact outcomes to the financing mechanisms that the companies essentially face. And that's actually, along with the 2X criteria in terms of compliance with at an organizational level, enabled actual impact already to happen. So in Rwanda, one of our portfolio companies have created an academy and began training women that are working in the EV space. So there's huge job opportunities there in terms of maintenance and the charge infrastructure. Other examples more broadly are actually in India with the work that we've done with SIDBI. So this is a 6 million risk share facility focused on EV for marginalized customers. And that's already began rolling out. We were there just a couple of weeks ago for the advisory committee, and we saw the impact that piece was having. That's a direct impact on the affordability of the vehicles via the financiers. So it's a upstream capital intervention that then supports the NBFCs to then finance the vehicles. And the affordability piece is a big challenge when you've got a differential in upfront cost. And so that's the gap that's there. But that can be managed with innovative financing mechanisms. I think the other thing is to consider a value chain approach. So having the experience both on the energy and the mobility side, we can see where the interlinkages are and where some of the opportunities are. So in Nigeria, for example, there's certainly opportunity for connecting the off-grid infrastructure to the e-mobility space. And we did some pilots there. We showed positive impact outcomes in the mini-grid business model by introducing EVs to those assets, although still challenges there in terms of the economics. So there are interventions that have had real impact. I do see a big opportunity for blended finance, and in particular for funds trying to raise capital from the private sector. They need to be rated. And the issue is that the large rating agencies don't respect blended finance structures. So if they don't respect that in their rating approach, the private pension funds and others won't come in. And so that's part of the issue for the emerging market side, is that having an approach that actually models reality, which is junior, senior, super senior layer structures, would actually enable a lot more private capital to come in. And so we often come in at the junior level of funds, and we work with intermediaries on the equity side. We don't do direct equity, but we do some sort of low interest loans and debt options as well. We also work with funding partners like FCDO, who have extensive knowledge and experience in market and have been providing match capital for a lot of the energy access work that we do. So we deploy about 25 to 40 million a year, and a significant part of that is working with FCDO on those blended finance mechanisms. So I'll pause there. I can go into more.
Okay, Jamie, you were nodding a lot. So, like, what do you agree on?
A lot of it was in terms of the financing, and I just sort of trying to cover 2 or 3 areas where I think it fits. I did say a lot of it will be private, and our estimates, we financed around 75,000 e-vehicles. The vast majority of that is in the private sector. It is a little bit opportunistic, which isn't the right approach. We need to be much more systematic about this. But I think it has been said, where are the opportunities and where is the potential market likely to grow with minimal risks? I'm glad it was mentioned 2 or 3 wheelers. That is a market where the tipping point, OPEX, CAPEX has been reached. But is perfect knowledge there? Can we use our financing to try and make that decision easier? If everyone had perfect knowledge, we would know that point, but there's still an upfront cost that's slightly higher, but the size of the vehicle, the battery cost, therefore the CAPEX isn't that much difference, but the downstream operating cost is. So the vast majority of our support has really gone into those 2, 3 wheelers, some light duty vehicles, but the majority is in that side. On the sovereign side, we've been doing a lot of the buses, but it's not just a like-for-like switch. And there's one example, Davao, Southern Philippines. It's looking at good transport. It's a whole modernization of the city's transport system. It's a population of about 1 million. They had 11,000 buses, jeepneys, as they call them in the Philippines, small scale, 12 passengers. The supply demand for good public transport system, better franchising mechanisms, better private operations coming in and de-risking the cost of the higher e-vehicles where they fit. But a lot of the just transition, a social training component, those 11,000 vehicles, we were trying to reduce it to 4,000 because we thought 4,000 vehicles could serve the system better. Public transport had tended to be used in many countries as sort of job creation. That isn't the best public transport. Yes, we're talking climate and climate finance, but good transport is good transport. If it's zero emission good transport, even better. If it's reliable and affordable, better still. How do we make sure we get that good transport in? But that's a $1 billion project. 300 plus million was going on the social component. And I don't think we can ever just talk about like-for-like switches when we've got very poor or non-existent public transport systems and hoping that a clean bus will provide that access when it's raining on a 7 o'clock on a Thursday night and people are stranded. We need to look at the operations, the supply side, the demand side, the fare structures, and how those de-risking of the vehicles. The final thing I just wanted to mention, some more of proof of concept type investments. We looked at e-fishing boats as a pilot. Can they work? Can they compete with diesel engines? Just to show that it's possible. And on the ferry side, in Thailand, the Chao Phraya River, again, our private sector, e-ferries. And these are large 200, 150, 250 passengers. So they're big ferries. But just looking at some of those areas that may not be attractive because it's never really discussed or proved, is someone willing to step into those areas to try and show that these things can work, whether it's very small scale proof of concept or something that's at a much larger scale in terms of the ferries in Bangkok, or just reforming and modernizing the entire transport system, but with a huge social component. And it's only with that sovereign side that we could come in. That couldn't be done privately. You're not going to find any private investor looking at 350 million for a social development program, I doubt, and expecting it to be economically or financially viable. So that's where the sovereign work in terms of climate finance can come in, and that just transition and social dimension, and some of the more bespoke areas in terms of the private finance as well. Thanks.
Would you agree on that, Jeanette? Because as you highlighted also just at the beginning, like how important those environmental and social aspects are. Is that hindering in fact or helping us to raise those more capital?
Well, what you just mentioned is extremely important because, and I mentioned it earlier, because transportation is part of a system. It's not something. It's not because you have a very good e-bus or you have a nice road that everything will change suddenly, and that people will adopt a new way of using transport and of moving in the city that is, probably very congested, that is also supporting a lot of formal and informal jobs around transportation. So when we worked with DFIs and MDBs, first of all, we're very happy because we're aligned in terms of the timeline, in terms of the fact that we invest for a very long time. So it gives us time to change the culture, but we need help. As a private investor, we also need the collaboration of every actors and every stakeholder, including the authorities, because we're ready to do capacity building to start changing the way the authorities will manage and see these important infrastructure as part of their the way to address the pressing needs of the population, and also to become more resilient. This is a way to make the cities more resilient. So this is very important, but to make the project feasible for private investors, it also has to be structured a certain way, and we need for the MDBs and the DFIs to continue to raise capitals to help us do that. And it includes grants and concessional debts and things like that. And to support as well the early development of the different projects with feasibility studies, with structuring the projects so that they will provide features that can be more let's say appealing for private investment. And someone from Proparco talked about the Dakar bus transit system. Meridiam has invested in that particular asset, and it took us a few years to develop it. So that means that we need to put the energy and the resources to do that, and we need the support of all the investors and all the lenders and the stakeholders. But also to add, let's say, the solar plant to recharge the buses, it makes the project more interesting for us because it stabilizes the OPEX, reduce the OPEX over the long term, and make sure that the asset will not become a stranded asset eventually because it relies on fossil fuel. So all this structuring is very important to attract private investment.
Jamie, you want to respond? Just before that, also, we will open also the floor also for questions. So if you want to already go also to the mic, then also feel free also to do that. Jamie.
Can I just pick up on the pre-feasibility role? I think that's very important. I'm going to come clean now on our Davao project. It took us about 10 years of hand-holding to get to the point where the loan was approved and the action can happen. It's a huge undertaking. We're changing mindsets. We're trying to do things that have never been done before, and it's not going to happen overnight. Yes, a lot of the private investment in the e-vehicles, but when we're talking system change, that needs a lot of hand-holding, a lot of technical support and grant in investment financial technical support to put it into a position where it can finally see real investments. Thanks.
So a very quiet audience. That means either sort of like you're all very clear and precise, or just also that we should just keep talking, or should actually break, whatever is the interpretation. So also online is also the opportunity. So if you want to also raise questions, but otherwise also you have to stickers with us. You're picking the mic. You want to say something?
Maybe just fill the gap quickly, although we do see we have. But
I have some questions.
I do want to respond to Vikram's comments because I think they were in response to mine because I think they were very good. I think I don't think we've seen in Africa in the sectors that we've been working in the kinds of companies that would be an ideal IFC investment. I think you're looking for a company that's going to have a 35% IRR or something like that. Well, certainly a venture capital investor who came in mid to late stage would want that. And I don't think we've seen them yet. I think we will see them in the 2- and 3-wheeler sector. I think there's a little mini Tesla out there. It's not going to happen if we take a drip investment approach like happened for 10 years in the energy sector, and there's a drip, and there just wasn't enough capital to really take the business anywhere. Early stage investing, you have to accept that it involves failure. So not every company is going to succeed. We've closed a couple of companies in the last couple of years, and we have a couple of total home runs. In the end, that's a pretty good portfolio for us. And I think that's the way I think we all need to look at building out sectors is we're going to have winners and losers, and it's the winners that are going to make it worth it. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, so we have some questions. So please also briefly also say your name and your organization, and please stay away from longer statements, but go straight also to the panelists. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob McInerney, the Chief Executive Officer for IRAP, the International Road Assessment Program. We're looking at sort of road safety impact investing and models around that. And I'm just interested in the panel's view of if you're getting pension funds to be willing and interested to invest in this, how important is it to have sort of common metrics of impact coming through so that they can scale that investment from one country to the next or one project to the next, knowing that similar metrics are driving the impact measurement and therefore the ESG outcomes and other things they're looking for as investors? Thank you.
Vikram, you want to?
Yeah, the IRAP question is a good one, right? It's something that, when we look at sustainability holistically, it's an important component of how we want to make transport road projects in particular more sustainable. I think for us on road safety, the challenge has been, and this is also from my colleagues at the World Bank, is to move in the case of safety away from a results-driven approach to an investment-driven approach, because results on road safety are very difficult to measure because investments in road safety at one point in the infrastructure or the network can have an impact on safety levels in different points in the network, right? So it's very difficult. Will it lead to a reduction in fatalities? May or may not. And I think that's the delta for us as far as road safety is concerned, right? When you do an investment on water reduction or recycled asphalt, you see clear benefits immediately. With road safety, we have to nuance that, and the market needs to understand that investments in road safety are critical. Results have to be seen over a very, very long term. So I think that there's a mind shift change that needs, but I think we're very interested in actually driving that approach on sustainability as far as road safety is concerned.
Want anyone else, Jeanette?
Well, maybe I just wanted to add that, to make a project a good project, one that will bring benefits and co-benefits, it's also in the way you develop it. It's not only the end result that you must look for. It's also, engaging with the people while you're developing the project, with all the stakeholders, with, including women, vulnerable groups, the communities. It's also designing the asset, taking into account all the potential shocks and stresses that climate change will bring over time. So the practice, how you do that, has evolved a lot, and you have to just do the work. There's no miracle way to do it. And for Meridiam, we have committed to all our projects in Africa are compliant to IFC's performance standards. So that helps us de-risk, make it bankable, but also ensuring that in the long term it will be sustainable and resilient. but it's a bit more work.
Thank you. Michael.
Yeah, I'm Michael Replogle. I founded the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy a long time back. Been active in this space and former deputy commissioner for transportation for New York City. I'd like to, one of the things that I haven't heard much in this year's Transforming Transportation is discussion of co-benefits. We started to get at a few of those talking about safety here, and I've heard a lot in this panel about trying to get projects de-risked so you can bring a pipeline of projects to market that have climate benefits. But how can we also bring together a pipeline of projects that aren't necessarily market winners because they're serving people who can't afford to pay for what they're getting because of high and growing income inequality in the world? And how do we ensure that we more appropriately create signals to governments and policymakers about the kinds of policies and investments that are being made at the local, state, and national level in countries where the finance is taking place, so that we're producing synergy towards action for climate and co-benefits along the dimensions of safety and more effective income equality and opportunity for people. I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Michael. So probably just one more question, and then we have a closing round and bring in the co-benefit. Thank you.
Jason Meggs for The World. Thank you so much for the panel. Piggybacking on what Michael Replogle said, I had a more specific case to consider. I'd love to see whatever we can do to eliminate gasoline from 2- and 3-wheelers throughout the world, especially in the global south. What have you considered, and do you think there's any potential, and what would it look like to do countrywide level mass replacement of gasoline engines with EV, retrofitting existing vehicles? Idea being, if you just give a new vehicle, that old vehicle will be kept running for almost ever. So we haven't solved the problem. And I could go on about why it would be helpful.
Okay, but that's in the break. But we have probably Emma also on the co-benefits.
Yeah, I can comment on those 2 points a little bit. So just agree with your point, what you're saying, and just to give an example from the energy sector space. So we did a bit of research measuring potential for results-based financing outcomes for productive use energy assets in sub-Saharan Africa. So what we found was 189 million of results-based financing would equal 3 billion in economic empowerment for 11 million women by 2030. So that's just to give the order of magnitude of what's possible. For transport, I think an integrated value chain approach is needed. So the systems intervention, we've seen examples of work with WRI in Hyderabad, where we connected e-vehicles with a digital platform to the metro. It helped the economics of that investment, but it also ensured last mile connectivity. So I think thinking of a system rather than just a bunch of vehicles on the road, it's about sensible investment. And to the second point, there's a lot of early stage innovation happening in sub-Saharan Africa and in India and beyond. The e-vehicle space has huge potential for tracking, monitoring, evaluation, GPS, artificial intelligence use for battery management systems. We're seeing innovation on multi-use battery technology, where we see the e-vehicle first life then being used as a stationary application, and that affects the economics massively. So we're looking at special purpose vehicle financing for battery as an asset class, like that in itself is a big opportunity. And then the retrofit point is interesting. We've tested and viewed some options on that. The economics of it are a little bit tricky, and the standardization is tricky. We tried this also in the Matatu space, and each vehicle has been modified in a different way. And so you can't actually standardize that process generally, but there is potentially more thinking that could be done there, or innovations in that area. OEMs are a big part of this puzzle. So there's huge amounts of research capital and co-funding capital from the equity side possible from OEM partners. And we see them interested in the space. So I think thinking beyond traditional actors and how other co-funders can come into the space is something we should think about.
Thanks. And I saw also Jamie also wanted to also go for the second question while so should already use the flaggers. This session was also in partnership with the High Volume Transport Program, funded also by FCDO, and they were asked also to rate this session. So hopefully also you have 5 minutes also time also to do that after. So Jamie and others also will close the session. Thank you.
Just on the large scale transition or retrofitting. Again, in the 2-3-wheelers, there are a few large manufacturers of 3-wheelers, but a lot of them are cobbled together, for want of a better term. There's a lot of innovative engineering that can go into those vehicles, and they are therefore ripe to be retrofitted because they're sort of manufactured locally or cobbled together. So, not a technical term. We're setting up a center of excellence to try and train e-vehicle technicians to do exactly that. Again, some numbers, 95% of the e-vehicles worldwide are 2- and 3-wheelers, and the data is not perfect, but we estimate around 50% of the 2-3-wheelers that are purchased today are electric. So there already is a sort of mass change, and that's because that tipping point has been reached, I think. But how do we scale it up? Is it just brand new, what did you call it, mini Teslas, or is it more a sort of backstreet operation on those? And very quickly on Michael's, and to offend any transport economics, maybe we need to totally reconsider how we look at transport economics. We're talking climate inclusivity, affordability. We're not talking about vehicle operating costs, but our economics and our investment decisions are based around vehicle operating costs because that's what our economics teaches. So I'll do a runner in case there's any clever economists who want to tackle me on that afterwards. But I think maybe we need to reconsider what we do. What's the priorities?
They decoupled the vendors from the TRB, so you will have less researchers around here. So I know it's 4:00 and everyone is want to go for coffee, but I like us together. So from everyone, or just the one sentence closing in terms of where you see from your organizational perspective, or so like the big activity and the silver bullet, or so your silver bullet, or so for the next 5 years. So to also really scale climate finance. And I start with Chris.
Everybody knows what I'm going to say. It's equity.
Thank you. That's a short and sweet answer. Emma?
So agree, equity coupled with the debt to follow on and grow, coupled with results-based financing. And I think partnerships, because we know none of us can do this alone. So this collaboration that is needed, and figuring out ways to bring people together around this challenge. Yeah.
Decarbonization will happen, but what can we do to accelerate that? How can we de-risk and make the better decisions?
Well, I thought I would be like kind of the emotional one saying collaboration, but yeah, I believe that this is greatly needed.
One-stop shop.
With that, thank you very much. Give also all the panelists a big applause. Thank you. And, thanks for WI and World Bank for hosting the session, and thanks also to the High Volume Transport Program also allowing us to that. So thank you and enjoy your coffee break. And I have no clue when you have to come back, so I'll come back.